Okay, so I'm going to call this meeting to order. So welcome to this evening's Committee of Adjustment meeting. Members of the public, applicants, agents, and staff may be participating this evening either in person or virtually via Zoom. For those attending via Zoom, please note that it is our standard practice for members of the public to have their cameras off and microphones muted until it is time for that person to speak. Township staff can assist with muting microphones. If you require assistance, please use the chat function asked staff. I'm also pleased to advise that this is being broadcast live on the Township's YouTube channel, where a recording of this meeting will be available. Note that the Township does not have the ability to edit the live stream or recorded versions of the meeting. Public meetings have been called and notice circulated in accordance with the Planning Act with respect to the applications for minor variance and or consent. The purpose of the public meetings are to inform and provide the public with an opportunity to ask questions and express views with respect to the applications. The format of the public meeting is as follows. Township staff will explain the purpose of the application and report on all correspondence received. Next, the applicant will present any further relevant information. Next, the public will be permitted to ask questions and express views on the proposal, and then the public portion of the meeting will be closed. And next, members of the committee will be given an opportunity to ask questions for clarification of the application. After all comments have been received, the committee will consider the application with due regard to the presentations and views expressed this evening. The committee will then do one of three things. 1, approve the application. 2, deny the application. Or 3, defer the application pending receive additional information. Specified persons who have provided oral submissions or written objections but disagree with the committee's decision on an application may appeal the decision to the Ontario Land Tribunal as entitled under the Planning Act. The deadline for an appeal of consent application is 20 days within the giving of notice, and for minor variances within 20 days of the decision date. When commenting on an application, please give your full name and address for the minutes. Please note that the names and addresses of those individuals who speak at this meeting will appear within the meeting minutes, which are public documents. If you wish to receive a copy of decision, please leave your name and address with Township staff. So moving on to item B, do any members of the committee have a disclosure of pecuniary interest? No? Moving on, I'm going to call for a motion. So I have a motion in front of me, identified as COA 2023-31, moved by member Kish, second by member Hiles, that the minutes of the July 18th Committee of Adjustment meeting be adopted as printed and distributed. And a call for a vote. All those in favor? We are carried. Moving on, we have an adjourned application. So would Township staff briefly would Township staff briefly introduce the application and report on any written response to the notice circulated for adjourned application minor variance identified as A-2-23?
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us. So this application is an adjourned application for a minor variance that was previously heard by the committee in February of this year and is now returning for reconsideration by the committee. As outlined in the staff report, the proposal has been revised since the application was last heard by the committee, so it was recirculated in accordance with the Planning Act for an additional public meeting this evening. Although no formal correspondence was received, it was brought to the attention of Township staff that there may currently be a camper trailer located on the subject property. The applicants are just advised that this is not a permitted use, and should this be occurring on site, the trailer would need to be removed. So just an update since the application was last heard, the applicants have retained the services of Morgan Planning and Development to assist them with their application. The applicant's agent does have a presentation prepared for the committee this evening, so I'll just use this time to provide an update on the application since the first public meeting. So as committee may recall, the subject property is located in the northwest area of the township along the shoreline of Cherry Bay of MacLean Lake. You can see the approximate location of the subject property just along the top of the screen there. The lands are currently vacant. The applicants intend to develop the lot with a single detached dwelling with an attached garage and deck, as well as eventually consider the construction of potential shoreline accessory structures at some point in the future. As noted within the staff report, the application was initially deferred pending the receipt of supplemental information regarding on-site servicing, a shoreline restoration plan, and further justification or an amended proposal. The applicants have worked with Morgan Planning and Development and Terra Story Environmental Consulting since that time to provide the requested information and amend their proposal for consideration by the committee. The updated proposal is described on screen in Table 1. Notable changes to the proposal include an added request for a reduced rear yard setback for required parking on site, as well as a slight increase in lot coverage to accommodate the amended dwelling design, as well as flexibility for future accessory structures in the future to avoid having to come back for additional approvals. So as shown on screen, this is the amended site plan that was provided by the applicants in July and August of 2023. The amended site plan depicts the location of the proposed on-site servicing to the left of the dwelling in the vegetated area of the property. A licensed septic installer was engaged by the applicants and their agents to determine an appropriate location with written confirmation provided to the township. The deputy chief building official did meet on site with the installer and notes that the township is in receipt of a proposed septic permit. The amended footprint of the subject dwelling indicates that the structure has been reduced from a two-story building containing a walkout to a single-story building. It's staff's understanding that the amended design would be more compatible with the bedrock terrain of the shoreline area. As noted, the applicants are seeking a reduced setback to the private road to accommodate on-site required parking. Staff note that the applicants did consult with the Private Road Association, which the association has provided written confirmation that they have no objections to the request. As described within the staff report, the applicants have sought the services of Terrace Story Environmental Consulting to provide a professional shoreline restoration plan to establish a vegetation protection zone on the property, as well as to identify mitigation measures to be implemented on site. As the subject property is located outside of a settlement area and is adjacent to a key hydrologic feature being MacLean Lake, the growth plan includes rigorous shoreline development policies within 30 meters of the water's edge and establishes a vegetation protection zone within this area. It's standard practice of the municipality. Planning staff recommend that the applicants be required to enter into a development agreement with the municipality to ensure that the shoreline restoration plan and recommended mitigation measures be implemented on site and that the VPZ area be protected should the application be provisionally approved by the committee. On screen now is the amended elevation drawing depicting the new proposed single-story design of the dwelling. And I just included a photo captured by staff during the initial site inspection in February of 2023, just to provide a visual representation of the topography of the subject lands. So Worgan Planning and Development do provide a detailed planning justification analysis within their justification report. As mentioned, staff recommended development agreement be considered as a condition should committee decide to provisionally approve the application. This is to ensure that all applicable policies are satisfied and that the mitigation measures and shoreline restoration plan are implemented on site. So no comments or objections were received from the Public Works Department and Fire and Emergency Services. The Deputy Chief Building Official notes no objections on the application and acknowledges receipt of a septic permit application for the proposal. And again, the MacLean Lake North Shore Road Association states no objections to the reduced rear yard setback for required parking. So with all that being said, the Planning and Development Department has no objections to the provisional approval of the application subject to the recommended conditions outlined in the staff report. And I'll go over those briefly now. So it is a bit hard to see on the screen, so I will provide a summary. However, it is included as an attachment to the staff report, which was published with the agenda. So standard conditions being municipal taxes paid to date, that the construction shall be in substantial compliance with the plan submitted with the application. And condition number 3 is that piece about the development agreement with the municipality to establish that vegetation protection zone, require the collection of securities for the implementation of that VPZ, provide for silt fencing and construction-related measures protecting the immediate shoreline area, requiring a lot grading plan certified by an Ontario land surveyor and prepared by a professional engineer, and require that the footings of the proposed dwelling be pinned by an OLS to ensure conformity with the minor variance, and that all costs associated with the agreement be the responsibility of the property owner. And thanks, that's all I have for this presentation.
All right, thank you. Does the applicant or their agent have anything further to add to the application?
Good evening, committee members. Thank you for the opportunity to present to you. My name is Lauren Arsenault, and I'm a junior planner with Worgan Planning and Development. My colleague, senior planner Victoria Lemieux, is also on the line, and we're available to answer any questions you may have after the presentations. I also wanted to mention that the property owners are present as well. I believe they're in the room with you. So if there's any questions for them, yes, be happy to answer after the presentation. I'd like to just share my screen now.
I'll let you know when it's up.
Okay, great. Is it up?
Yeah, I think we're good. Please proceed.
Okay. So Morgan Planning and Development prepared a planning justification report on behalf of Dean and Elizabeth Kenney, owners of the subject property 3163 MacLean Lake, North Shore Road, and they're requesting a minor variance to seek relief from a number of zoning provisions related to the residential development on this vacant property. As Emily stated, committee may remember that the owners brought this application forward in February of this year, and the application was deferred pending receipt of a shoreline restoration plan and further information on the proposed septic design and location. Morgan Planning and Development was retained by the owners shortly thereafter, and a shoreline restoration plan prepared by Terra Story Environmental Consulting, as well as a letter from a licensed septic installer confirming that the proposed septic meets building code were obtained, both of which have been provided in the revised submission package in an effort to address committee's previous concerns with the application. The subject property is located on an isthmus on the north shore of MacLean Lake. It has approximately 1,264 meters squared, or 0.3 acres total lot area, and 41 meters of frontage onto Jerry Bay. The depth of the property is approximately 31.5 meters on the shortest interior lot line. The property is currently undeveloped and is vegetated with mature trees and rock outcropping that takes up much of the interior of the lot. The property is proposed to be developed with a dwelling and septic, and the owner also hopes to construct a dock and boathouse in the future once the dwelling has been erected. Here's an aerial image of the property and the surrounding lands. As you can see, the site is quite a shallow depth. And again, as Ms. Hale mentioned, the property is zoned shoreline residential restricted access SR3 and environmental protection along the shoreline. The property is designated shoreline residential in the township's official plan. The application is seeking relief from the minimum lot coverage and setback provisions as set out in the township zoning bylaw to allow for residential development on the subject property. Specifically, they're seeking relief from the permitted front yard setback of 12.3 meters. And that is to the northeast corner of the covered deck or gazebo, which I'll show you in the next slide. And similarly, that relief is required for the special setback provisions, special setback from a watercourse. As well, relief from zoning bylaw section 334.8, from zoning bylaw table 6.2 to permit a lot coverage of 18%, whereas the zoning bylaw provides a maximum of 15%, and relief from zoning bylaw table 4.2 to permit a parking space within 1.8 meters of a street line or the edge of the road, whereas the zoning bylaw provides no parking space shall be permitted within 3 meters of a street line within the shoreline SR3 zone. So here is a look at the site plan showing the proposed development. And as you can see, the dwelling is modest. It's under 1,600 square feet, including the garage, and it has been sited strategically on the property to avoid topographic constraints, to be set back as far as possible from the shoreline, as well as to maximize the interior yard space from the abutting lot to the west, which is developed quite closely to this property line, as you can see here. Again, here's a look at the proposed elevation from the road. As Ms. Hale mentioned, the owners originally proposed a 2-story structure containing a walkout basement, but have since revised their design to scale the dwelling to a more appropriate single-story bungalow. Here is the elevation from the shore, and the scale is in keeping with that of the surrounding area. This is a zoning matrix outlining the specific provisions the variance is seeking relief from. And just to note, with regards to the reduced setback for the proposed parking space to the straight line, Worgan Planning and Development reached out to the road association, and they were able to provide written comment that they would have no problem navigating the proposed setback to maintain the road year round. And although the parking proposed does comply with the zoning bylaw requirements, the owners recently expressed interest in accommodating additional parking. So we had our draftsperson superimpose an additional spot on the site plan, which would comply with zoning standards, provided the variance for the reduced straight line setback is successful. So you can see right here is just an additional parking space. And as previously mentioned, Terrace Story Environmental Consulting Incorporated has prepared a shoreline restoration plan that incorporates native plantings. And staff have recommended as a condition of approval of the minor variance that the owner enter into a shoreline development agreement to implement this restoration plan. You can see the close-up of the planting plan with 10-meter vegetation buffer denoted by the blue dotted line. Further, DTS and Associates provided a letter of support on the proposed septic design and location, stating that it would meet the Ontario Building Code. The septic filter bed also meets the required 20-meter setback from the shoreline. In formulating the planning rationale for the minor variance application, Worgan Planning and Development considered the 4 tests, which are outlined in our accompanying planning justification report. Worgan Planning and Development is of the opinion that the proposed development is minor in nature, is desirable for the appropriate development of the subject lands, meets the general intent and purpose of the zoning bylaw and the township's official plan. Victoria, the owners, and myself are available to answer any questions that you may have regarding the variance. Thank you very much for your time and attention.
Thank you very much. We'll come back if there's any questions. Just a question to township staff. Was this notice circulated to members of the public again? Okay. So for persons present who have either questions or wish to speak in favor or in opposition to the application, please address your questions through me. The applicant may be asked to respond to each party. When commenting, please give your name and address for the minutes. So I'm going to ask if there's anybody out there that has anything they want to say. So you got to come up here and you got to grab the microphone and you got to turn it on. Turn on the microphone. So name, address, and then ask your question.
My name is Nicole Nahus, and my address is 100 Concession 2 East Tiny. My question is actually just with the restoration plan. Tell me if I'm wrong, because there was a lot of information to take in at once. So the bylaw is 20 meters front yard setback, and they had to do a restoration plan. And so then they're requesting a 12.3 meter. So does that mean the restoration plan is actually not meeting the requirements that was requested in the first meeting?
I'm going to springboard this over to Worgan Planning and Development.
Through the chair, I believe the application that was brought forward in February, it was requesting a reduced setback from the shoreline as well. And staff and committee requested that a shoreline restoration plan be prepared to mitigate that setback.
So you just have to grab the mic and re-ask the question. Sorry, it's being broadcast live. So
I didn't quite understand. So are they reducing the shoreline with their new proposed requested, you use words that I don't use, with their requested new shoreline development? Does that mean like the the shoreline is going to be part of their house now, or is it actually going to be restored to what was their beginning?
So it might be good if somebody could bring up the drawing. I think there's a drawing in the report that showed the location of the proposed dwelling in along the shoreline, right? And explain the setback.
I can bring just a minute. Can everybody see that?
Yeah.
So the reduced setback that's being requested is 12.3 meters, and that's from the edge of the covered gazebo to the closest portion of the water's edge right here. You can see my cursor. And so the shoreline restoration plan recommends plantings within the shoreline area. So it's within the 10 meters from the shoreline. And it recommends that this area be naturalized and be maintained as a no-mow zone. Does that help answer your question?
To further answer the question, if you could put your cursor where the septic bed is, I think that is the 20 meters from the shoreline. So if these people were trying to meet the bylaw, that's what the minor variance is for, is to go closer to the shoreline. If they were meeting the bylaw, they wouldn't be able to build right at the septic tank, right? Which is pretty much a parking space into the property. Okay. So if there's no other questions, I declare the oops. Grab the mic. Have at her.
The property with my wife Betty here. Can we go back to that picture, please?
Sorry, did you want me to bring the site plan back?
Bring the site plan back, please. I just wanted to address a little bit on that, if I may, please. That's if you're looking to septic field, two sheds that are there. We had addressed with and this is Mary and her daughter here. Those sheds. I didn't know if that was part of the 20 years. The shed is still on the property. They have questioned, excuse me, they had questioned whether the professional that did the survey there, they questioned perhaps that they made a mistake, which I don't think they did. We paid good money for it. The shed is still on now. And taking that shed off our property, I think, is it 1.5 meters that it's a shed supposed to be off the property? I believe it is.
We can get that question answered for you through townships.
I believe it should be. I mean, if that shed was moved past where it should be at 1.5 meters, then that would accommodate more of that room by the septic, if that was their concern. I'm not sure if it was. Oh,
that's all. I'm gonna pass this over to township staff to answer that question.
Through the chair, in the shoreline residential 3 zone, the minimum interior yard setback for an accessory structure not containing habitable space is 1.5 meters from the interior side lot lines and 20 meters from the shoreline.
great. Thank you.
If there are no other questions, I'm gonna. So grab the mic, unmute, name, address.
On.
There you go.
I'm Marianne Franson. I own the property beside Dean and Betty's. And here's my address. I live at 2497 Floss Road 4 West, Phelpston, Ontario. My concern is, like, these are old sheds that were there. So now you guys are telling through Dean that we're moving them 1.5 meters from property line? Like, I'm not getting that. Nicole's concern had nothing to do with the septic or anything. I know kind of what she was talking about is that the shoreline and the vegetation. So they want this minor variance so they can build, which I understand. And according to your bylaw, the property up to the shore has to be maintained, right, with vegetation to protect the shoreline. Nicole's concern was if they're asking for the variance to build, does that mean that the minimum shoreline protection is going to be compromised? That was where she was kind of going with that. Not so much like the building location or anything. It's from the shoreline in, the amount that you expect to be protected, is that still going to be protected with the variance? Thank you.
So I'm going to pass this one over to Worgan Planning and Development to discuss a little bit about the restoration plan that's in place to answer this question. Or that will place, sorry.
Sorry?
Just briefly discuss the restoration plan and how that will help the shoreline with this minor variance, I think was the question.
Thank you, Chair. The 20-meter setback is what is required as of right through the zoning bylaw. However, we are requesting relief from that setback for 12.3 meters. And committee has and staff have recommended that a shoreline restoration plan be prepared to address concerns with shoreline health. And so that report recommends plantings along the shoreline and recommends that this area be kept naturalized to keep the shoreline healthy. Victoria, do you have more you want to add to that?
Yes, if the chair is okay with me jumping in as well, appreciate that. Just wanted to reiterate as well, of course, neither Ms. Arsenault or myself wrote the shoreline restoration plan, but of course, I think what happened, because of course, Morgan Planning wasn't involved with the original application in February, but maybe staff can provide some additional detail. The zoning bylaw does require a shoreline buffer area to be restored and maintained across, I believe it's 50% of the lot, but maybe staff can reiterate that. But I believe that 10-meter area that the shoreline restoration plan really focuses on was based on that zoning bylaw requirement. And also, I'm assuming conversations with staff after that initial meeting. So maybe we would ask staff to jump in if there's anything else that that could provide some more clarity to the residents. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Emily.
Thank you, Chair. So when applying for an application through the Planning Act, there's additional policy sort of at the provincial, county, and township levels that are applied. The growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe that's applied by the province establishes what's called a vegetation protection zone within 30 meters of the shoreline. So any development that's proposed to occur within 30 meters of the shoreline that's outside of a settlement area needs to ensure that that development would result in the restoration of the shoreline to the maximum extent possible. So typically the township ensures that occurs through a development agreement and the implementation of a shoreline restoration plan that is prepared by a qualified professional. So in this case, it was prepared by a consulting ecologist, just to ensure that there are, if there are any impacts, that they are mitigated to the maximum extent possible, and that shoreline's restored and protected to the maximum extent possible.
Thank you. Thanks for all those answers. I know there was some comments with regards to a shed. The shed has no relevance on this application at all, and we will not be commenting about the shed moving forward. That's for you guys to figure out. Hearing that, and there's no other questions or comments, I declare the public portion of the application closed. Do any members of the committee require further clarification or wish to provide comments on this application? Member Bossy. Yep.
Questions to staff through the chair. The 0.8 meters for the parking, could you show me where that 0.8 meters comes in on the map up here?
Please go ahead.
Through the chair, Lauren, do you mind putting up the diagram with the parking setbacks? Perfect. So the requested setback for required parking is to accommodate, sorry, I'll just wait for it to.
It's going through. You're going to share your screen again? Perfect. We see it.
Perfect. Worgan Planning and Development prepared this diagram that depicts the setback for the required parking. So parking in the shoreline residential 3 zone is typically required to have a 3-meter setback from the edge of the street line. So typically in a regular shaped lot, like a standard lot, that would be from the edge of the road allowance inward. However, MacLean Lake North Shore Road actually it's on a portion of it is on the applicant's property. So the applicants are seeking a reduced setback to allow for a parking of a vehicle within 0.8 meters of the street line.
Thank you. Seeing as there's no other questions and no other further committee discussion, I'm going to call for a motion. So I got a motion before us, identified as COA 2023-32, moved by member Heil, second by member Bossy, that staff report D23-016 be received and that minor variance application A-02-23 be provisionally approved, subject to the conditions included as attachment 6 to staff report D2306. I'm going to call for a vote. All those in favor? We are carried. So thank you. We're going to move on to our next application. So would township staff briefly introduce application identified as E1, which is an application for consent B-02-23.
Thank you, Chair. Our next application, as mentioned, is consent B-02-23 for lands located at 3599 Severn River. Here we have a key map of the subject property outlined in red. It is approximately 2 kilometers downstream of the Swift Rapids lock and approximately 2 kilometers upstream from Severn Falls along the Severn River. The subject lands are shown in red here and are surrounded by shoreline residential properties on both sides, along with some crown lands to the back. You can see the limits of White Pines Road here. The committee may be familiar with this area as well of the township, as this property was formerly the subject of the consent application, which sought to facilitate the extension of Sherwood Forest Lane, the creation of a new private road. That application has been provisionally approved by the committee at this time. So this application does propose the existing lot to be severed to facilitate the creation of 1 new shoreline residential lot with 1 retained. So there would be a total of 2 shoreline residential lots. Township staff do have some concerns with the application with respect to its conformity with the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe, the township official plan, and the township zoning bylaw. And planning staff are of the opinion that additional information is required to determine consistency and conformity with all of the applicable planning policies. This is just the severance sketch that was provided with the application. Part 2, which is outlined in the red dashes, is what is sought to be severed through this application. And below that is a table just showing the overall lot area and frontage of part 2. This map here, it is a little bit hard to see on screen, so I do apologize for that. But basically the red outline is the subject lands as it is today. The red dashed line in the middle would be the newly created lot line. That lot line does dissect the property and also dissects the rural zoning, which is applied to the rear of the property, along with some key hydrologic features being wetlands and a stream. Those features and that rural zoning are what staff are kind of working through with some concerns with the application. It would create 2 undersized rural pieces on the property. The zoning bylaw does require a minimum 10 hectares for the rural zone. And this application would have the effect of creating 2 parcels that are undersized. Additionally, the dissection of those key hydrologic features is just something that township staff are looking for a little bit of additional information from the applicant's consulting environmental consultant on before we are comfortable moving forward with the application. Here are just some site photos taken when the site inspection was completed. The first 2 photos are just standing on the shoreline looking to the north and south, and the third is just looking across the Severn River. So as explained within the staff report, there are additional details with respect to the development envelope to incorporate all of the constraints with respect to building and servicing is requested. The dissection of those key hydrologic features as proposed by the lot lines needs to be explored further. And there is some concern with the deficient lot area in the rural zone portion of the lands. The building department did provide a comment asking that the applicant provide an updated site plan just to incorporate all of the constraints. For example, vegetative buffers, hydro corridors, water courses, into the proposed building and septic envelopes so that a more specific site evaluation can be completed. The County of Simcoe also commented that the application needs to ensure consistency with local and provincial natural heritage policies, as well as demonstrate that any proposed site alteration would not have any negative impacts on the ecological function of the shoreline. So for those reasons, the Planning and Development Department does recommend that the application be deferred at this time pending further information. And I'll leave it at that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Does the applicant or their agent have anything further to add to the application? No. Okay. For persons who have either questions or wish to speak in favor of or in opposition to the application, please address your questions through me. The applicant may be asked to respond to each party. When commenting, please give your name and address for the minutes. So is there anybody that has a question or comment to this application? Seeing none, I declare the public portion of the application closed. Do any members of the committee require further clarification or wish to provide comments on this application? Seeing none, I think there is support for a deferral. And so there's no other committee discussion. So we have a motion in front of us identified as COA 2023-33, moved by member Bossy, second by member Gunby, that the staff report D23-017 be received, and that the matter of consent application B-02-23, the application be deferred pending further information. And a call for a vote. All those in favor? We are carried. Yeah, carried. So that's good. So that's it for that application. So would township staff briefly introduce the next application identified as E2 on the agenda, which is an application for consent identified as B-03-23.
Thank you, Chair. The final consent application this evening, B-03-23, Denne for lands located at 3403 Muskoka Street in Washago. Here we have a key map of the subject property. The subject lands are shown in red, being 3403 Muskoka Street, and the benefiting lands in purple, 3405 Muskoka Street, both located at the intersection of Muskoka Street and Highway 169 in Washago. The 2022 aerial imagery, you can see the subject lands outlined in red. Again, the benefiting in purple. I do apologize. There's a little bit of an alignment issue with the mapping. As you may see there, those property lines should be shifted a little bit to the south. The existing dwelling that is shown on the aerial imagery here has been demolished with a building permit in 2022, so the lands are presently vacant. The requested consent does seek to facilitate a lot addition by severing a portion of the subject lands to merge it with the benefiting lands. The parcel of land is approximately 200 square meters in area, and it has no frontage, so that it can be used in conjunction with the benefiting lands to accommodate future commercial uses. The severed lands would be required to obtain Planning Act approvals to recognize the lot area of the portion of land, as it is undersized based on the zoning bylaw requirements. With that said, township staff do have some concerns with uses that appear to be occurring on the proposed benefiting lands. It is understood that it is the intent of the property owner to address these matters through the proposed redevelopment of the site. However, the lands must be brought into compliance with the zoning bylaw. The severance sketch that the applicant's consultants have prepared, the subject lands are in the lighter yellow color up here. The lands here with the hatching are what are proposed to be severed from this parcel and added to the brighter yellow lands to form one consolidated parcel. It is the understanding that these consolidated lands eventually may be merged with some other adjacent lands. However, that is not the subject of this application in particular. Just some site photos. The first one here is taken standing on County Road 169, looking in at the benefiting lands, which are vacant and graveled here. You can see the side of the existing residential dwelling that sits on the subject lands, as well as the vacant back portion of that lot. This photo here is just taken from Muskoka Street, looking in at that existing residential dwelling on that property. I do wish to point out to the committee that following should the committee approve the severance, the dwelling would comply with the setback requirements and lot coverage for that zone. The first photo here is just the rear yard of the subject lands, which are vacant, that are proposed to be severed and merged with the benefiting lands. And then in particular, this is just a photo of the outdoor display and sales occurring on the vacant lot, which is in contravention of the zoning bylaw. Staff also have concerns from a site triangle perspective, just to ensure appropriate visibility when approaching the intersection from the roadway. So as detailed within staff report D23018, planning staff do generally concur with the opinion of the property owner's consultants with respect to the applicable planning policies. And then as mentioned, following the site visit, there is some concern with respect to uses occurring on the site, and the owner is reminded to bring the property into compliance with the zoning bylaw. There were no comments or objections received as part of the circulation for the application. And for those reasons, the Planning and Development Department has no objection to the provisional approval of the application, subject to the recommended conditions, which are pretty standard for this type of development, being that the severed lands receive appropriate Planning Act approvals to recognize their lot area, a reference plan just so that the severed piece can be legally described, a copy of the in preparation draft deed provided to the Secretary Treasurer for review, ensuring that the severed lands merge with and are not separately conveyable from the benefiting lands, and that the property owners shall undertake all steps that are required to do that. The owner's solicitor shall provide an undertaking regarding the process that they will follow to ensure that those lands merge, as well as an acknowledgement that a deeming bylaw application may be required to facilitate that. And that the registration of the transfer must be provided to the township within 3 months of the date of the registration. Taxes paid in full, any fees are the responsibility of the property owner, and that they have 2 years to complete those conditions. So I will leave my presentation there. The applicant's agent, Ms. Arsenault from Worgan Planning, is also available and has a presentation as well. Thank you.
Sounds good. Does the applicant or their agent have anything further to add to the application?
Thank you, committee. I'll just set up my PowerPoint again. Everybody see that?
You can see it.
Thank you again for the opportunity to present, and thanks to staff for that summary. I'd like to expand on it a little bit and share this presentation that we have prepared. Morgan Planning and Development was retained by Tom Denne, owner of the subject lands 3403 Muskoka Street, to prepare a planning justification report in support of a lot boundary adjustment with the abutting parcel 3405 Muskoka Street, which is also owned by Mr. Denne. The subject property is located within the Washago settlement area, west of the Green River Dam and Gristmill. The subject property is located on the east side of Muskoka Street, north of County Road 169. And the subject property 3403 is currently developed with a residential dwelling, and the benefiting lands are now vacant, having recently undergone demolition of a two-story dwelling. The purpose of the consent application is to sever approximately 200 meters squared from the rear portion of 3403 Muskoka Street and add it to the abutting property at 3405 Muskoka Street. It is intended that the benefiting lands will later be merged with the abutting parcel 8259 County Road 169 and further 4337 Heppenstall Landing, all owned by our client under separate title, to allow for redevelopment and expansion of the Washago Timber Mart. Here is a look at the existing lot fabric, and I will note that this aerial imagery is, I believe it's from 2018, and the dwelling that you see in the yellow portion has since been demolished. Here's the proposed lot fabric, and just to be clear, this application is only considering the boundary adjustment between these two properties, 3403, which is shown in red, and 3405, the benefiting lands, shown in yellow. This application does not include the merger of any lands to the east with the Timber Mart property, although ultimately that is the owner's intent. Here's another look at the boundary adjustment sketch, and I will note that the retained lands will maintain a functional rear yard for the outdoor enjoyment of the tenants through this application. Here's some photos of the existing site conditions. You can see here the detached dwelling. The rear yard of this lot is subject to the severance, as well as the benefiting lands, which are currently vacant, being used for parking, serving the Washago Timber Mart. And staff has expressed concerns with the current use, as the parking is not currently located on the same lot as the business, but is the owner's intent to promptly rectify this by merging the benefiting lands with the Washago Timber Mart lands, should this application be successful. And just to further illustrate the need for the additional outdoor display and sales area, as well as parking, you can see here that there's a very limited number of parking spaces to service this use, which also intersects with a throughway to the lumber yard, creating a congested parking area. As well, the outdoor display area is crowded and located very close to the road. The properties are designated settlements by the county's official plan and settlement employment area by the township's official plan. The boundary adjustment will not result in any loss of employment lands. Subject property is zoned downtown commercial C2, and the benefiting lands are zoned highway commercial C4 within the Township of Severn zoning bylaw. It is anticipated that the severed lands would be required to be rezoned to the highway commercial C4 zone as a condition of this consent. You can see also in this on this slide, the Washago Timber Mart properties are in blue with the blue outline here, just to get a better reference of the area. Here's the zoning matrix showing the existing and proposed lot areas and frontages for both properties. There's no change in frontages for either lot. Only the lot areas are changing, and both would comply with the zoning requirements for lot area. The boundary adjustment would not be considered development under the PPS or the growth plan, given that no new lot is being created. However, it's important to ensure that the proposed boundary will not prohibit any future development or growth potential. Similarly with the county's OP, which allows for minor boundary adjustments. The township's OP states that a consent may be permitted for the purpose of enlarging existing lots, provided no new building lot is created. In reviewing an application for such a boundary adjustment, Committee of Adjustment shall be satisfied that the boundary adjustment will not affect the viability of the use of the properties affected as intended by the plan. And as mentioned previously, the proposed lot fabric allows for the residential use of the retained lands to be maintained and complies with zoning requirements, including setbacks and lot area. The benefiting lands are intended to be merged with abutting lands in the future. However, the lot area and frontage of the parcel could support highway commercial use regardless. Morgan Planning and Development's opinion that the resulting lot fabric would not prevent future development opportunities for either lot. Future development of the benefiting lands will be subject to site plan control and will be required to implement urban design policy and guidelines. To conclude, the boundary adjustment will permit the existing residential use to continue and allow for future redevelopment and expansion of the Washago Timber Mart, which is a long-standing employer generating local business. Morgan Planning and Development feel the application conforms and complies with all levels of applicable planning legislation and represents good land use planning. Thank you for your time and attention. Victoria and I are available to answer any questions you may have regarding the application, and we kindly ask that you approve the application before you this evening, subject to the conditions listed in the staff report.
Thank you very much. So moving forward, for any person present who has either questions or wishes to speak in favor or in opposition to the application, please address your questions through me. The applicant may be asked to respond to each party. So is there anybody that's here that wants to ask questions or comment on this application? Seeing none, I declare the public portion of the application is closed. Do any members of the committee require further clarification or wish to provide comments on this application? Member Bossy.
I just have a question through the chair for Brad. Are we considering the cross-hatched area tonight, or just the yellow area on the south side of the?
Go ahead. Through the chair to Member Bossy. The application proposes to sever those lands that have the cross hatching from the northern part so that they could be added to the larger lot to the south.
Question for Brad again through the chair. So are we considering that crosshatch tonight, or just the yellow part?
Just the crosshatch part. So that's the subject of the application. So if the committee chooses to approve the application this evening, you would be considering whether or not you want to approve the severance of those lands shown in the crosshatching.
Thank you. Right. I don't see any further comments. Thank you. I don't see any further comments or questions. And I don't think there's going to be any further discussion. So I'm going to call for a motion for this application. So I have a motion before us. It's identified as COA 2023-024, moved by member Gunby, second by member Kish, that the staff report D23-018 be received, and that the matter of consent application B-03-23, the application be provisionally approved, subject to the recommended conditions attached as attachment 5 to staff report D23-018. So I'm going to call for a vote. All those in favor? We are carried. So that ends that application. So moving forward, would township staff briefly introduce application identified as E3, which is an application for minor variance identified as A-09-23.
Thank you, Chair. So the next application is a request for minor variance affecting the lands known as 3222 Cox Drive. Staff note that additional correspondence was received from the applicant, as well as a letter and petition in support of the proposal, which has already been circulated to the committee. The subject property is located nearing the end of Cox Drive along the northeastern shoreline of Lake St. George. The lands in this area, as well as the subject property, are primarily used for residential purposes. As noted within the staff report, the subject property is currently occupied through the construction of an unauthorized single detached dwelling and associated pump house, as well as an existing accessory structure. In March of 2023, township officials determined that the existing dwelling had been demolished and the construction of a new single detached dwelling and pump house had commenced on the lot without the benefit of a demolition or building permit. The applicants have retained the services of Powell Planning and Associates to assist them with their minor variance application to facilitate the construction. Namely, the applicants are seeking a reduced interior yard setback for the subject dwelling. As noted within the report, a request to recognize reduced lot area and frontage was also included with the application. It is not the township standard practice to recognize a reduced lot area or frontage if they are not proposed to change through the application, as the bylaw does already include provisions recognizing these types of situations for undersized lots. However, it's the opinion of staff that the request would not impact the application or the intended result. Therefore, staff have no objection to the inclusion in the application. As depicted on screen is the as-built concept plan that was submitted by the applicants with their minor variance application. Ms. Powell, who's in attendance tonight, has provided a planning justification report and an addendum to accompany the application, which outlines the applicable policy which has bearing on the proposal, including a detailed policy analysis. As described within the staff report, planning staff would also add that the lands are located outside of a settlement area and do propose development within 30 meters of the key hydrologic feature or the shoreline of Lake St. George. The natural heritage policies of the growth plan therefore do apply in this situation. So as committee is aware, the growth plan establishes a 30-meter vegetation protection zone or VPZ within 30 meters of the water's edge inland on the subject property and requires that any new development demonstrate that the proposal will result in the restoration of this VPZ area to the maximum extent possible. As is this township standard practice, township staff recommend a development agreement as a condition of provisional approval to include a shoreline restoration plan prepared by a qualified professional to ensure that the VPZ is maintained and restored to the maximum extent possible as required by the growth plan, should committee choose to provisionally approve the application this evening. Depicted on screen now is the proposed elevation drawings representing a draft of the as-built elevation of the subject dwelling that was provided by the applicants with their application. Depicted on screen now is the subject dwelling on the left from the roadside, so from Cox Drive, and the right being from the water side, so the shoreline of Lake St. George. The fire chief has provided comments on the application and indicated that the existing fire pit on the subject property is not compliant with the township's burning bylaw. The fire department further indicated that a burn permit for this property for 2023 has not been issued. Recommended conditions which speak to these points are included for committee consideration this evening. The bylaw department also requests that the parking of utility trailers in the Cox Drive Boulevard cease to avoid a situation where enforcement would have to be pursued. As noted in the staff report, Ms. Powell provides a detailed policy analysis within the PJR and the associated addendum of the applicable policy, which has bearing on this application, including the 4 tests for a minor variance. Planning staff do expand on the policies of the growth plan within the staff report, addressing the standard requirement for a development agreement to ensure that all applicable policy is satisfied, including the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe. So the comments received on the application, no comments were received from the Public Works Department. However, as discussed, the Deputy Chief Building Official notes no objection to the proposed minor variance. They do indicate that the applicant will be required to obtain a building permit and provide any required engineering and documentation required by the building department. Further to the discussion earlier regarding the trailer, the municipal bylaw enforcement officer notes that there appears to be that trailer located on the boulevard portion of the roadway. They indicate that it's not permitted to be parked at its current location and to ensure compliance with the Township of Severn parking bylaw as well as the road occupancy bylaw. The trailer would need to be removed from that boulevard. If the trailer is removed from the township property, if the trailer is not removed, from the township property, possible consequences include parking tickets or issuing fines under the road occupancy bylaw. And the fire department comments, as discussed earlier, indicate that the owners advise the fire pit on site exceeds the requirements of the township burning bylaw, and that no burn permit has been issued for the subject property for 2023. So the Planning and Development Department has no objections to the provisional approval of the application. However, it is subject to the conditions that are outlined within the staff report. So I will go over those now. A bit hard to see on the screen, but I can provide a summary. So the standard condition of municipal taxes being paid to date, that the construction is in substantial compliance with the plan submitted with the minor variance application. Number 3 being the requirement for the development agreement within the with the municipality pursuant to the Planning Act to establish a vegetation protection zone, requiring that shoreline restoration plan prepared by a qualified professional, including recommended locations of planting, species, quantities, and implementation guidelines. Collection of securities for the implementation of that VPZ, provide for silt fencing, silt and sediment fencing, and other construction related measures on site, require a lock rating plan completed by a professional engineer. That would be to the satisfaction of the chief building official. Require that the footings of the proposed dwelling and attached deck be pinned by an OLS to ensure conformity with the requested minor variance. All costs associated with the agreement and registration on title be the responsibility of the property owner. And the last comments on the screen here speak to the comments that were received from the other departments. So the applicant apply and obtain the applicable building permits in accordance with the Ontario Building Code, and that the applicant provide any required engineering and documentation required to the satisfaction of the building department. That the property be brought into compliance with the township's burning bylaw to the satisfaction of the township's fire chief, and that the property owners oversee the removal of the trailer appearing to be located within the boulevard portion of Cox Drive to bring the lands into compliance with the township parking bylaw and road occupancy bylaw to the satisfaction of the municipal bylaw enforcement officer. But that's all I have regarding the staff report this evening. I believe Ms. Powell is still in attendance and does have a presentation for the committee.
Okay, does the applicant or their agent have anything further to add to the application?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, we prepared a presentation. If staff could kindly provide the presentation for all to see. Thank you.
Ms. Powell, if you would like to share your screen, you're welcome to do so as well, if that's easier for you.
Oh, okay. I have speaking notes, so it might be easier if I have the presentation on one side. Is staff able to share it?
Yeah, I can try and coordinate that. 1 second.
I think we're good to go.
Perfect. Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Chair, committee members, members of the public, and staff in attendance. My name is Aimee Powell, and I'm a registered professional planner, as well as the Chief Planning Officer for Powell Planning and Associates, the planning consultant acting on behalf of the landowner, Mr. Manny Campoli, for the lands located at 3222 Cox Drive that are subject to application A0923, which is an application seeking relief from the Township Zoning Bylaw 2010-65 to recognize the subject lands as an existing legal non-complying lot concerning its frontage and size, as well as for the interior side yard setback. Mr. Campoli is in attendance this evening and is able to answer any questions that I might not be able to address. Next slide, please. So during my presentation, I'll be speaking to the file's history, the site's location and existing state, as well as describing the existing zoning and official plan designation, describing the development that we are here today before the committee to discuss for your consideration of approval, and concluding with summarizing how the application represents good planning in accordance with the 4 tests of a minor variance. Next slide, please. So with regards to the file history, as staff has indicated, in March of 2023, the landowner was contacted by township staff regarding the building department's on-site inspection concerning the redevelopment that had taken place prior to and without permit issuance for the as-built cottage. Staff requested for a survey of the lands, which then identified the redeveloped cottage did not meet the interior side yard setback standard, which is 3 meters, as the as-built condition only measures 1.85 meters from that side yard. The landowner was provided a contravention zoning bylaw notice in accordance with the Township Zoning Bylaw 2010-65 on June 27th, 2023, with a request for reply by July 18th, 2023. I was then retained and provided a submission for minor variance by that July 18th, 2023 deadline. That submission included a fulsome ask of relief for a number of standards that have since been scoped to 3 standards that are subject to this amended application, which include the lot frontage as well as the lot size and the interior side yard setback. The subject site is located in the Washago community on a shoreline residential lot fronting onto Lake St. George with vehicular access from the west side of Cox Drive. The site is approximately 695 meters squared in size. It's generally flat in its topography, and it has approximately 15 meters of frontage. Next slide, please. The Township Zoning Bylaw 2010-65 zones the subject lands as environmental protection and shoreline residential, and the Township's official plan designates the subject lands as shoreline residential, where low-density residential uses are permitted that maintain the rural character while respecting natural heritage features such as inland lakes, vegetation, and landscapes, which aligns with the proposed development. Next slide, please. So here is a site plan or concept plan, if you will, of the subject development. It's an as-built 2-story, 3-bedroom, 1,800 square foot single detached cottage on a shoreline residential lot. The cottage was built in Q1 of 2023, and it replaced a pre-existing single-story bungalow where the footprint of the redevelopment is smaller than that of the pre-existing bungalow. The pre-existing shed at the rear of the property has been maintained, and there's a ground floor deck at the front of the cottage, as well as a pump shed that was built alongside the redeveloped cottage, and parking is provided at the rear of the property. The property also benefits from generous perimeter trees, adding privacy abutting on its borders, abutting neighbors. Variances are being sought for the recognition of the lot that was created prior to the passing of the bylaw, given its legal non-complying frontage of 15 meters, where 60 meters is required, and the minimum lot side of 695 square meters, where a minimum of 4,000 square meters is required. The reason that these variances are being brought before the committee today is in accordance with section 3.19.1 of the Township Zoning Bylaw. That requires when a provision of the bylaw is not complied with, it causes us to recognize the lot in its current configuration, alongside the relief being sought for that interior side yard in accordance with section 6.4. Next slide, please. In accordance with the Planning Act, the provincial policy statement, the growth plan, the County of Simcoe's official plan, the Township of Severn's official plan, and the Township of Severn's zoning bylaw, the proposed development aligns with provincial, county, and lower tier policies overall. It also represents feasible development that maintains the character of the neighborhood while better utilizing the subject lands, and overall represents good planning. We are seeking to establish an existing lot and only request a 1.15 meter relief from a 3 meter standard for the interior side yard, which is minor in nature and meets the 4 tests of a minor variance. We understand through township staff's conditions that have been drafted in consideration of this application that a development agreement, including a shoreline restoration plan, is required, and we look forward to working alongside staff to bring the site into compliance for the as-built structures and to provide restoration enhancements. Next slide, please. In support of this application, the landowner collected 13 signatures from surrounding neighboring landowners who advocate for the subject application. They were never bothered by its construction, and they also appreciate the landowner's investment into the community that respects its existing character and natural beauty. The landowner has already begun to navigate the conditions that were provided by staff in terms of applying for the burn permit, as well as looking to remove that trailer, if not tomorrow, then early next week. So we just want to show our commitment to being in compliance moving forward with the site. We look forward to working with township staff to be in compliance for the file overall. We thank the committee for your consideration of this request and to staff for your support as we have progressed the file over the past few months. We're happy to answer any questions of the committee or anyone else in attendance. Thank you for your the opportunity to speak tonight.
Thank you. For persons present who have either questions or wish to speak in favor or in opposition to the application, please address your questions through me. The applicant may be asked to respond to each party. So is there anybody here that would like to ask questions or comment about the application? Seeing none, I declare the public portion of the application closed. Do any members of the committee require further clarification or wish to provide comments on this application? Member Bozzi.
Question to staff. Are there any septic considerations for the new build?
Over to township staff.
Thank you, Chair. Through to Member Bozzi. It's my understanding that the Deputy Chief Building Official has been working closely with the applicant on that. However, that would be a condition of a complete building permit. They'd be required to demonstrate that the septic system can adequately support the proposed development.
Member Kish.
Through the chair to the staff, what is the front yard setback for accessory structures?
Go ahead, township staff.
Thank you, through the chair. So it depends on the accessory structure. Or you were speaking to the pump house. So the pump house is permitted within the required yard, provided it meets the other provisions of the zoning bylaw.
Okay. And then through the chair to staff, in reference to the shed, we are approving or provisionally approving the 1.8 meters. I see the shed is only 1.5 meters. What repercussions would come to the property owner for that shed, I guess, at that point?
Township staff.
Thank you, through the chair. So it's staff understanding that that is an existing legal non-compliant situation. However, the accessory structure is compliant with the accessory structure interior side yard setbacks of 1.5 meters. The situation of non-compliance or legal non-compliance in that case is the rear yard setback. However, as it is an existing shed on the property, it's permitted to continue so long as it doesn't change.
And then through the chair to staff, to my understanding, the setback from the front yard would be 20 meters. I guess for the deck, is it still that 20 meters or is it a reduced setback?
Township staff.
Thank you, Chair. So for a deck that is lesser than 2 meters in height, it's permitted to project up to 3.5 meters into the required yard. So in this case, it would be 16.5 meters. So that would be applied to the lower level deck of the attached to the subject dwelling, with the second level balcony being compliant with that 20 meter setback.
Okay, Ms. Powell. How'd we get here? There's got to be a reputable contractor involved in this project. So how'd we get here? You know, we got a letter correspondence for forgiveness, but this absolutely ties my hands and other committee members' hands with these types of projects. So how'd we get here?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So it's my understanding that the landowner was looking to relocate their primary residence. They were in a bit of a dire situation concerning timelines, and that's why they advanced the build prior to going through the proper channels.
I don't know if that excuses that or not. Over to the property owner. How'd we get here?
Not the property owner.
Not the property owner? Oh,
Next on the list.
Oh, you're next on the list.
I'll be glad to stay.
Yeah, no, sorry. It's all good. Yeah, you're online. The property owner online.
Hello.
Yeah. Hi.
Can you guys hear me?
I can hear you.
Yep. It's definitely a mistake on my part. I needed to relocate out of the city of Toronto as quickly as I could. I know that's not an excuse, but I needed somewhere to relocate me and my family.
I guess I got a question to township staff. Are there any other than the coming here tonight? Is there any other repercussions that will happen by the premature building of this residence? Township staff.
Thank you through the chair. The chief building official would be able to impose like double permit charges and items such as that are applied to structures that were built without a permit.
Member Hiles.
Was the decision to through to the property owner through the chair, was the decision to circumvent all the needed building permits for this a decision made once you found out the timeline it would take to do them, or were they completely disregarded when you decided to relocate?
So me and my family actually had to relocate in a very timely manner. Currently right now, we're just staying with a family member, but it was mostly a timing concern. Yes.
So there was no conversation or no outreach to the municipality prior to beginning any sort of building?
There was outreach once. We were planning to build a much bigger home, and then we decided we couldn't afford to. So we just left the exact same footprint as is to build what's there now.
Thank you.
Member Kish.
So through the chair to the property owner, I guess, were you the builder, A? And if so, did you understand the requirement to have proper permitting before you started?
So I'm not a builder. I do have a little bit of background in construction, but mostly for renovations, and I'm very new to this area. But I did have other people assist me with the build, different contractors, trades, etc., all which are fully licensed and all that stuff.
So you have worked within the construction realm before and do realize that majority of municipalities, if not all, I don't want to specify all, would have the requirement to have building permits, typically for even the removal of a wall inside of a structure, let alone building a whole new residence and pump house.
So my background in construction is mostly towards, I guess, would be basement renovations and small washroom rentals. My main business is I'm a restaurant operator, so I don't know all the laws and bylaws. So no, I wouldn't have known.
So I guess through the chair to the owner, to my understanding, those minor basement renovations would also be requiring permits. So going forward, I would expect that you educate yourself on the requirements prior to taking an adventure into building a home, or possibly doing construction projects for individuals without the proper permitting.
Totally understand. As far as basement renovations go, I believe, to my knowledge, all the things I did didn't require a permit. Like, for example, changing floors, painting, trim work, hanging doors, stuff like that. That's kind of mostly of what I do.
Member Gumby.
Excuse me. Thank you. I just wanted to clarify that just because it's already built, this application is supposed to be looked at like it's not already built. So I don't think having questions asked about why the permit wasn't applied for is really matters in this case. But that's my opinion.
Member Hiles.
Through to the property owner through the chair, and respecting the last comment, absolutely. Are you able to share with us the contractors that you used? Were they local contractors?
I don't think that's relevant.
Okay.
No, I'm gonna.
Thank you.
Don't have to
Thank you,
answer.
Mark.
It's all good. So seeing as there's probably no other comments or further discussion, I'm gonna call for a motion. So I have a motion before us. It's identified as COA 2023-35, moved by member Kish, second by member Bossy, that staff report D23-019 be received, and that minor variance application A-09-23 be provisionally approved, subject to the conditions outlined in attachment 5 of staff report D23-019. I'm going to call for a vote. So we're voting to be in favor of this application. So all those in favor? We are proceeding. So we have a 4-1 vote. That is it to that application. So moving forward, would township staff briefly introduce application identified as E4, which is an application for a minor variance identified as A-10-23.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the final application on tonight's agenda regarding minor variance application affecting the lands known as 3869 Wood Avenue. The lands are located within the service settlement area of West Shore along the western shoreline of Lake Couchiching. The lands are, the subject property is currently developed and utilized for residential purposes, as is characteristic of this area of the municipality. The subject property is currently developed with a single detached dwelling and associated residential accessory structures. The applicants are seeking to reconstruct a single detached dwelling on the subject property utilizing the same general footprint as the existing structure. The applicants are seeking a reduced rear yard setback to the Wood Avenue road allowance to accommodate the development. So table 1 on the screen describes the requested variance, so a rear yard setback of 5.25 meters to the Wood Avenue road allowance to accommodate the dwelling and attached garage. Depicted on the screen, it's a little bit hard to see, but it is the proposed site plan that have been provided by the applicants and their agent. As noted, the requested minor variance is to accommodate the reduced rear yard setback to the attached garage and dwelling, which is, if you can see my cursor, it's speaking to the setback here. The structure intends to use as much of the existing footprint as possible to accommodate the development. As noted within the report, the lands are located within a fully serviced settlement area. Policy direction from the province and county specify that these areas within the township are to be the municipality's focus of growth and development. As the lands are within a settlement area, there are less rigorous natural heritage policies than what is applied outside of these fully serviced areas. However, staff do note that the dwelling would be located within the same general developed envelope on the subject property and therefore do not anticipate further vegetation removal as a result of the application. The Public Works Department has stated no objections to the proposed minor variance as advertised for the reduced rear yard setback to the public road allowance that is maintained by the township. So the applicants did attend a formal pre-consultation meeting with township staff prior to the submission of their minor variance application. At that time, it was noted that the subject property appeared to be composed of 2 lots on a plan of subdivision. So although the lots are held in common ownership and used as a single property, lots on a plan of subdivision will always remain separately conveyable unless they're deemed to otherwise. So the applicants at that time were advised to consult with their lawyer to determine if a deeming bylaw application would be required to ensure that those 2 lots held in common ownership would merge into a single consolidated parcel to accommodate the development, which would otherwise cross the boundaries of those 2 lots that compose the subject lands. The applicant's solicitor has submitted a concurrent deeming bylaw application to accompany their minor variance. However, for clarity purposes, it's still included as a recommended condition for committee's consideration. Depicted on the screen is the proposed elevation drawings for the new dwelling. The top of the screen is the elevation from the front, so the water side being from Lake Couchiching. And the lower elevation is from the south side, showing the attached garage in the 2nd story, which is the portion of the dwelling that's affected by the minor variance application. Depicted on screen are photos taken by staff of the existing dwelling proposed to be demolished to accommodate the proposed development. These photos are taken from Wood Avenue. As shown on the image, the proposed setback appears to be consistent with the established building line along Wood Avenue and as discussed within the staff report. So as noted, the applicable policy as prescribed by the Planning Act appears to be supportive of the proposal as it is located within a settlement area and appears to satisfy the 4 tests of a minor variance. No objections were received from the clerks or fire and emergency services department. The deputy chief building official states no objections to the proposed minor variance, but does note that the proposed construction will be required to meet the spatial separation requirements of the Ontario Building Code. Further, the Public Works Department is accepting of the reduced rear yard setback of 5.25 meters. They did wish to note that newly proposed U-shaped driveways, as similar to the one that is on the subject property, are no longer permitted. However, this driveway has existed in this specific configuration on the property for greater than 20 years. So the Public Works Department will accept the driveway as shown. The applicants are advised that no changes to the driveway would be supported by the Public Works Department. If the applicant should wish to change the driveway, there would only be one in and out entrance permitted. So for the reasons outlined in the staff report, the Planning and Development Department has no objections to the provisional approval of the application, subject to the recommended conditions. Oh, too far. So in this case, that would be municipal taxes paid to date, that the construction is in substantial compliance with the plan submitted with the application, that the applicants apply and complete the deeming bylaw application process, which would facilitate the merger of those lots on that plan of subdivision. All costs associated with the registration of the deeming bylaw on title shall be the responsibility of the property owner, and that the existing vegetation on the property shall be preserved and enhanced as much as possible. Thank you, Chair. That's all I have regarding this application at this time.
Okay. Does the applicant or their agent have anything further to add to the application?
Hello, this is Breanna Allen of Sustainably Drafted. Address is Unit 2, 1107 Muskoka Beach Road, Gravenhurst. Thank you, Emily, for the presentation and members of the council for your time. As shown on the site plan, the proposed dwelling is proposed to go forward to the water's edge by 2.82 meters than the current dwelling is. The client feels that it's important to preserve the space at the waterfront. The proposed dwelling will remain in line with the 2 neighboring dwellings from the waterfront, which takes into account the objective of the township's official plan for redevelopment to be compatible in terms of building form and the character of the neighboring properties. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. For persons present who have either questions or wish to speak in favor or in opposition to the application, please address your questions through me. The applicant may be asked to respond to each party. So is there anybody here that wishes to either question or comment on this application? Seeing none, I declare the public portion of the application closed. Do any members of the committee require further clarification or wish to provide comments on this application? Member Bossy?
I guess this is just for my personal understanding. What is meant by spatial separation when it on your summary page?
Township staff?
Thank you to the chair, to member Bossy. So that's a building code requirement. It sort of just specifies the construction of the structure relative to the property line. So when structure is getting closer to a property line or between structures, there's additional like fire separation requirements, for example, through the actual construction of the structure.
Thank you. Seeing there's none and no other further clarification or comments, we've gone through the conditions. I'm going to call for a motion. I have a motion before us, identifies COA 2023-036, moved by member Bossy, second by member Hiles, that staff report D23-20 be received and that minor variance application A10-23 be provisionally approved subject to the conditions outlined in attachment 6 of staff report D23-020. And a call for a vote. All those in favor? We are carried. So that is it. There's no reports from officials. There's no correspondence. I'm going to call for a motion for adjournment. I have a motion before me, identify COA 2023-37, moved by member Bossy, second by member Gunby, that the Committee of Adjustment be adjourned at 8:02 p.m. on Tuesday, August 15th, 2023. Call for a vote. All those in favor, we are carried. Good night.